Star Trek, the biggest movie and TV franchise of all time. But how did one show become so successful?
It inspired people to believe in themselves and reach beyond their perceived limitations.
The best of what we did was done in the hopes of illuminating mankind's potential.
Now, former cast members and producers reveal the truth behind Star Trek. From creator Gene Roddenberry's original ideas.
We're all one people on one planet.
Roddenberry had a piece of paper. A piece of paper. Most guys came in with a book almost.
The characters that never made it on screen.
He had a character who was the devil. And I said, you know, that's very inventive. It's terrible because television will not accept that.
If they're going to get rid of the pointed ears, the next thing is going to get rid of me.
And the real science that gave Star Trek the edge over other sci-fi shows.
The use of antimatter as a propulsive source of energy in Star Trek is exactly right.
What we did in science fiction had some connection to potential reality.
We discover how Star Trek's glamorous multiracial crew made television history.
There was a lot of fuss about it. When a black person came on as a star of a TV show, it was a big deal.
The birth of the Trekkie fan base.
Here was a show that they were going to cancel. No.
And we investigate Star Trek's legacy, how it turns science fiction into science fact.
I was a big Star Trek fan. You would see all these technologies that were totally science fiction, which of course today are reality.
This is the real story behind Star Trek. Larger-than-life characters, idealistic politics, and the one man who started it all. Star Trek the Motion Picture premiered on December the 6th, 1979, and raked in a massive $139 million at the box office.
Secure all stations. Clear the bridge.
4 years in the making, Star Trek the movie brought back William Shatner as Captain Kirk and Leonard Nimoy as Mr. Spock. It was what the world and Trekkies everywhere had been waiting for.
You will be assimilated.
But the motion picture was just the start. 3 decades on, Star Trek has become a multi-billion-dollar franchise and a household name. The real story behind Star Trek began almost 30 years before the movie hit the silver screen, with sci-fi fan Gene Roddenberry. A former World War II pilot, by the early 50s, Roddenberry had become an LA cop. After a long police shift, his favorite way to relax was in front of the TV.
My father really enjoyed the repetitiveness of television based on what he had seen on TV through the westerns and the cop shows. And that each week you get to connect with an audience.
TV had only just begun to take off, and Roddenberry saw it as a way to make his mark on the world. Using his day job as inspiration, by night he started writing scripts for new cop shows such as Mr. District Attorney and Highway Patrol.
He was trying to make a living. He was trying to work in the industry to make a living and managed to write a couple of scripts.
By 1956, Roddenberry's scriptwriting was earning him 4 times his cop salary. So he quit the force and began writing full-time for the weekly western Have Gun, Will Travel. 7 years later, he was finally producing his own show, The Lieutenant, a series based on the US Marines. But Roddenberry's passion was science fiction. And by the end of 1963, he'd come up with a futuristic new idea he had high hopes for.
My father started off as a bomber pilot in World War II and flew 70 or 80 missions in the South Pacific. He fought and killed people and saw his friends die. I mean, he saw the ugliest we could possibly be. That's what forced him to think about our future.
3, 2, 1.
In the early 1960s, the space race was well underway and influencing popular culture on every level. Space wasn't a new topic for films and TV, but Roddenberry's idea was. In the 23rd century, a united Earth sends a peacekeeping spaceship to seek out new life forms and civilizations across the universe. He called it Star Trek.
My father did have this beautiful vision of the future, but he had to figure out how to get it out there.
Roddenberry approached several major studios, but his big break came in 1964 with a meeting with producer Herb Solow, the man behind hit show Mission Impossible.
Roddenberry had a piece of paper. A piece of paper. People have to understand. Most guys came in with a book almost. Here's a rundown of all our characters and their description and their background, their relationship to each other. And he started to stumble through talking about the idea.
Roddenberry's initial pitch bore little resemblance to the final product. His starship was called the SS Yorktown and commanded by naval officer Captain April. Second in command was a woman called Number One, while the ship's lieutenant was a very early version of Mr. Spock, a fearful-looking half-Martian with a satanic appearance.
He had a character who was the devil. Devil had pointed ears and arched eyebrows and had a tail with a pointer at the end of it. And I said, you know, that's very inventive. It's terrible because television will not accept that.
People in what was known as the Bible Belt, the southern states, the United States, religious people might see this character as devilish and would not want that devilish character on their TV sets.
Despite Spock's outlandish looks and Roddenberry's stumbling presentation, Solow saw potential in the idea.
I said, I like this, what you're talking about. So it must be good because you sure as hell can't sell it. You're not a good salesman.
A few days later, Solow arranged a meeting to pitch the series to former colleagues at NBC.
Today, a pitch is a whole big deal. You practice for the pitch. Your books you could buy on the... There's nothing like that. It was simply you go in there and you say, we have an idea for a television series, right? And if in the first few minutes they don't like it, they say, thank you very much, Herb. But, you know, come again, call us, you know, we'll have lunch, whatever. Gene started to speak badly, and I cut him off because I could see the looks on their faces. I went ahead and pitched the idea. It's adventure, it's detective, it's war, it's this, it's that. It happens to be in outer space. When we finished discussing, they looked at me and they said, we don't think that's for us.
With NBC backing down, the future of a multi-billion-dollar film franchise lay in the balance. In 1964, Star Trek was still just an idea on a piece of paper. Hoping to commission a TV series, producer Herb Solow took Gene Roddenberry to meet his ex-colleagues at NBC. Their initial reaction was audiences wouldn't be interested. But Solow was ready to put his reputation on the line.
I wasn't going to take no for an answer. These are my friends. I mean, they at least could give me a script commitment, right? Let us write the script to prove to you guys it's something different, guys. It's different. They went ahead and agreed to a script, which was great, a script. That's all we needed was the script.
See you soon.
Solow and Roddenberry immediately started work on a script. Several months later, NBC agreed to commission an hour-long Star Trek pilot. The SS Yorktown had become the Enterprise, and rising star Jeffrey Hunter signed up to play the lead, now called Captain Pike. His sidekick, Mr. Spock, had been transformed into a Vulcan science officer, and relatively unknown actor Leonard Nimoy was called in to try out for the role.
Captain, it will be very gratifying to leave here.
Promoted to producer for the pilot, Roddenberry was determined to stamp his mark on every level of production.
This was a gentleman who didn't like to be called the producer of Star Trek. He wanted to be called the creator. the creator of Star Trek.
Gene would tell everyone that he created the whole look of Star Trek. I'll tell you right now, that's abject untruth. The look of Star Trek came from a very talented draftsman and artist named Matt Jeffries.
Unimpressed with the efforts of previous sci-fi shows like Flash Gordon, Roddenberry's brief for the Enterprise was it had to look capable of carrying a 200-strong crew across the galaxy.
Matt started to design different looks to the Enterprise. Yeah. And we finally agreed on one. And Matt said, fine, before we show it to Roddenberry, I'm going to make a big color version of the one we like. He said that always works with producers who are unsure of themselves. And of course, when Gene walked in, his eye went right to the color one. That's how the Enterprise was born.
While the iconic shape of the USS Enterprise was pure Hollywood fantasy, Roddenberry insisted Star Trek's futuristic technology, from communication systems to traveling in space, had to be scientifically plausible.
I think a lot of it was believable. The science in Star Trek could evolve into reality in the future, and a lot of it did. A lot of it did. We had the first what we call communicators as cell phones. It's ubiquitous. Everybody has one. Everybody has one. And the first ones had that flip-open cover, just like what we had on the show.
Stop by my cabin, Doctor.
What we did in science fiction had some connection to potential reality.
Almost half a century after Roddenberry's first pilot, how does Star Trek's on-screen science stand the test of time? By 1965, man hadn't yet reached the moon, and other planets was still a pipe dream. But Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry wanted his fictional starship, the USS Enterprise, to travel the universe effortlessly and, more importantly, believably. Traveling at the speed of light, 300,000 kilometers per second, it would still take 5 years to reach our closest star, Alpha Centauri. Roddenberry, looking for a way for the Enterprise to cover these incredible distances, found the answer in the theories of the most celebrated physicist of all time.
In his general theory of relativity, Albert Einstein showed that space and time are intimately connected, and that you can think of space-time as a kind of fabric that stretches and bends. If we actually compressed space in some fashion, we can reduce the distance between our starship and the place it wants to go by a tremendous amount.
So, while it is theoretically possible to warp space, one huge problem stands in the way of making it a reality.
It would take a tremendous amount of energy to warp space in such a way that it would provide a means of propulsion for a starship. So in Star Trek, we have this hypothetical warp drive, and it works in a very specific way. Matter and antimatter are collided together, which produces a tremendous amount of energy.
When Roddenberry first devised the antimatter warp drive as a way to travel to the stars, physicists knew antimatter existed, but they hadn't been able to isolate it. 5 decades later, one of the world's most expensive physics experiments here at CERN in Switzerland has finally made the science behind Star Trek's warp drive a reality. Physicist Jeffrey Hangst now works with antimatter on a daily basis.
I'm sure that for many people, the first time they ever heard about antimatter was watching Star Trek, and that captured their imagination. What is this? What's it about? This mysterious stuff, whatever it is that powers starships. People come here and take tours, and then they're astounded to find out that this is actually real. A lot of people still don't think that antimatter is real. The use of antimatter as a propulsive source of energy in Star Trek is exactly right. In principle, if you knew how to harness that, it's the most weight-efficient rocket fuel you can imagine.
Thanks to scientists like Hangst and his team, it has now been proven beyond doubt that when matter meets antimatter, they annihilate each other, releasing a huge amount of energy in the process. But containing it safely is a problem. Less than ½ kilo of antimatter can release the equivalent power of a hydrogen bomb. So, for now, the team here at CERN must stick to working with very small amounts.
Say I have some antimatter and I'm going to use it in my spaceship to react with matter to create energy. How do I actually engineer that into something that produces thrust? Okay, I don't know how to do that. That's the beauty of science fiction. You don't have to go into the details. But I can promise you it's much more complicated than you can imagine.
Even if scientists did come up with a safe source of fuel for a warp drive engine, it would be a struggle to produce the amount of antimatter needed.
We're dealing with single atoms. Say a gram of antihydrogen will get you a few liftoffs, perhaps. But it would take something like 100 billion years, right? That's longer than the known age of the universe to accumulate that type of antimatter with the technology that we have today. It's just insurmountably difficult.
For now, space travel is a distant possibility. But back in 1965, with Star Trek's first pilot completed, Gene Roddenberry's dream of his own intergalactic TV series was about to come true. Then, disaster struck. Audience testing was mixed, so NBC pulled the plug on the series.
Give him a bit of time. So I started talking with him again. And we finally decided it's too good a concept, it's too good a look, it's too entertaining, really, just to toss away.
Once again, Solo had put his neck on the line. In an unprecedented move, NBC commissioned a second pilot.
And then the problem started. I arranged to have a screening of the first film with Jeffrey Hunter. Jeffrey was the star of the first pilot. And Mrs. Hunter walks in. She said, "I've come to tell you that Jeffrey Hunter is a movie star. He no longer is doing television." I said, "Oh."
I'm tired of being responsible for 203 lives, and I'm tired of deciding which mission is too risky and which isn't, and who's going on the landing party and who doesn't.
I had to call NBC and say, "Fellas, after all we went through with the scripts and the first pilot and everything else, we don't have a lead. Jeffrey Hunter won't do it." And they said, "Herb, at this point, we will take anyone that you think is good for the role. However, now that we're talking about it, we don't like the rest of the casting."
In the summer of 1966, producer Herb Solo and Gene Roddenberry completed the second Star Trek pilot. From the original cast, Leonard Nimoy was the only major character to avoid the cut. He was joined on the bridge by Captain James T. Kirk, played by well-known TV actor William Shatner.
This utopia of theirs is one of the best-kept secrets in the galaxy.
This time, the pilot was a hit with test audiences, and NBC committed to a 29-part series. But not everyone was impressed.
That night, my father's father went up and down the block, knocking on everybody's door, apologizing for his crazy son who had put on that ridiculous show.
Across America, though, thrilled by its stories and spectacular future technology, a loyal fan base was growing. But Star Trek's use of special effects nearly crashed the budget, particularly when it came to landing the Enterprise on far-off planets.
Land it? We can't land it. We couldn't afford the optical to land it. And so what Gene did is, Gene came up with an idea, which turns out wasn't his idea. He borrowed it, which is the transporter.
Transporter room.
In the 1960s, Roddenberry's Transporter was pure science fiction. Now, incredibly, almost 60 years on from his first show, the possibility of a Star Trek-like transporter isn't completely fictional. A group of theoretical physicists at the University of Maryland are now taking the first real steps towards saying, "Beam me up, Scotty."
If you wanted to do something like they do in Star Trek, you want to teleport me from here to there, you would have to teleport the information that describes how I'm arranged into that matter. We don't teleport the matter itself, we teleport the information.
While not exactly a transporter, the team has discovered the next best thing. A way to create an exact copy of an atom, even at a great distance. They can isolate an atom in one location, then connect it by laser beam to another atom and force it to mimic the properties of the original.
We can trap a single atom, move it around in space, we can change its internal state, and now we can transfer the state of that atom to another atom.
Incredibly, once the laser is removed, the atoms remain linked, and any changes in the first atom are replicated in the second. But these are just single atoms. Could the same technique be used to transfer the characteristics of larger objects, or even humans, as in Star Trek?
So Dave, if we wanted to teleport you, how long would that take? Well, you have about...
Each atom takes 1 second to transfer its information, and the average human body is made up of 7 billion atoms.
We would need 100 billion times longer than the age of the universe to teleport you.
So we're staying here then?
You're staying here.
While Star Trek's technology remained in the realms of science fiction, ratings were falling, and Gene Roddenberry would be drawn into a battle to keep his series on air. In March 1967, American broadcaster NBC announced a second 26-episode Star Trek series. Its creator, Gene Roddenberry, was becoming a household name, and the former cop's newfound status began to go to his head.
One of his people came around saying things like, "Don't get too out of line here because we can put the pointed ears on somebody else." And I thought, oh, really?
Gene would boast that he had a friendship with every actress in every episode except for 2. That was Gene's claim to fame. He was married and had a girlfriend at a house near the studio and another person, an actress, in an apartment. That was Gene. But no one wanted to upset things.
He was a man like any other human being. Complex, a wide range of ideas in his head, inventive, creative, certainly. When he was on his game, he was excellent. He also could fail, and sometimes did. He wrote a couple of episodes which we're not proud of, and the scripts were put away on the shelf.
But even when the scripts were good, they were often late. To hurry Roddenberry along, the assistant director developed a novel technique.
With the company idle on the set and everyone waiting for the script changes, Bob Justman, in his own strange way of getting things done, would parade into Roddenberry's office, climb up on his desk, and say, "Gene, I'm not getting down from here until I have the pages to take to the set." And he'd stand there. Roddenberry would giggle or what have you, and finally would make some scratches and send it to the set. And that's what Bob would do. He had to just pull them out of Gene.
I actually enjoy hearing those negative stories because it humanizes my father for me. You know, when someone paints my father as this almost mythical figure, how does anyone identify or connect with that? When you humanize a person, when you learn that they're just like you or me, they make mistakes, they do dumb things every now and then, but they still created this beautiful vision of the future. That's someone I could admire.
But by the end of 1967, the Star Trek creator was brought back down to earth. Ratings were falling on the second series. Worried the show would be canned, Roddenberry went on the offensive.
Gene, as opposed to spending his time worrying about the series we were making, he was worried about how to get it renewed, because the renewal meant money to Gene. So while we were doing the show, Gene was organizing the fans on who to write to, what to do, how to campaign.
I think he really did a great job of organizing the energy that was available with the Star Trek fans. Star Trek was never very popular in numbers, but the following that we had was intense.
Star Trek's loyal fan base was Roddenberry's secret weapon. Among the very first Trekkies were Bijo and John Trimble.
Hi.
Hi.
Come on in.
Come on in.
Determined to keep the show on air, they spearheaded Roddenberry's campaign.
Star Trek was very different from any other show that came along. Here was a show that they were going to turn around and cancel. No. That really annoyed me. I think we had a moral prerogative not just to save the show, but to let these networks know that the public had an opinion. We discovered that Paramount had bags and bags of mail that they had never told the Star Trek offices about. Getting access to the mail bags was fairly easy. Gene Roddenberry wrote a memo to them and said they're authorized to do this.
Using the addresses from the mailbags, Bijo and John then sent out letters to the fans, asking them to put pressure on NBC. Other die-hard fans took a more radical approach.
I had a friend of mine, who was vice president of NBC. They gave out his phone number. It got too much. NBC contacted me and said, you got to call off these people. I said, I'm not doing it. I have nothing to do with these people. They're Roddenberry's fan groups.
Letters and phone calls weren't enough. Turning up the heat, Roddenberry then mobilized his Trekkie troops, encouraging over 500 to march on NBC.
It was about half serious and half a lark. But they had a good day, and Gene did join that. He was supposed to be incognito, but come on, he stood something like 6'3". The fans just loved it. They bragged about that for a long time.
It was a full-fledged campaign, how to get NBC to do it through embarrassment, pressure, whatever. And NBC finally said, okay.
NBC executives decided to bow down to public pressure and committed to another 24-episode Star Trek season.
NBC announced on air that Star Trek would be picked up for a third season to put a stop to all this angry energy that was coming at them. I thought, okay, we're going back for a third season.
And when we heard, yes, we're going to get a third season, it's like, yes!
Thanks to Roddenberry's determination and his tenacious Trekkies, Star Trek returned to the airwaves in the autumn of 1968. In a time when America was facing racial unrest and a Cold War with the Soviet Union, for many, the show's appeal was its utopian ideals and its escapism.
He had very strong feelings about mankind's potential, that it would be a good thing if we could all live cooperatively.
We don't use our weapons for the kind of brutality you practice.
Star Trek represented a united Earth, bringing together people from every race and even other worlds.
Where I come from, size, shape, or color makes no difference.
And to push his ideals for a better future, Roddenberry would create a scene so controversial it would make television history. By 1968, the Starship Enterprise was heading out for a third season, carrying its peacekeeping multiracial crew across the galaxy. Its communications officer, Lieutenant Uhura, was played by Nichelle Nichols. At the time, it was unheard of for an African-American woman to play a leading role.
There was a lot of fuss about it. When a black person came on as a star of a TV show, it was a big deal.
Even though segregation had been made illegal by a series of landmark laws in the United States, it still persisted. In big parts of America, mostly in the South, blacks and whites could not eat together, could not attend the same schools, could not ride in the same train car.
Did we have racial problems? Oh, yes. Some of the fan mail was very anti having anyone on the set that was not white.
With racial tension dividing America, Roddenberry decided to court controversy by writing a scene guaranteed to raise blood pressure in the religious southern states. Television's first ever interracial kiss.
Our immediate reaction was, all right, by God, about time.
And my second reaction was, boy, are they going to hear from the Bible Belt on this one. We got our share of some really nasty letters. But here was the thing. You get one nasty letter and you get 100 really great letters. It was a step forward, I think.
Despite Roddenberry's hordes of Trekkies pushing NBC to commission more episodes, by 1969, Star Trek was a loss-making flop, with ratings falling and the final shows relegated to a graveyard slot. The series was cancelled. Roddenberry's dream was in ruins. Then, when it seemed like the end for Star Trek, it was syndicated on 150 American TV networks and over 60 countries worldwide.
A whole new audience took to Star Trek. It became incredibly popular. Conventions began to appear. First Star Trek convention was in 1972, right, when the show had been off the air for 3 years. That's really what led to the Star Trek phenomenon. It was the embrace of a show that had already been canceled. That was unique in television history at that time.
With worldwide syndication, the ranks of Trekkies grew rapidly.
Long live the Empire!
By 1976, there was such a groundswell of support for Star Trek, NASA was swamped with letters demanding the first space shuttle be renamed Enterprise. Back in Hollywood, Paramount Studios saw an opportunity to cash in. And Roddenberry went back to work on the first ever Star Trek movie. But producers found themselves concentrating more on the visuals than the writing.
So the special effects had to be grand and glorious, and they were grand and glorious, and they continue to be grand and glorious. Here's the ship going this way. Ah. Here's the ship going that way. Ah. Here's the ship coming toward us. Ah. Ooh. Ah. Where's the story? It was a struggle. It didn't flow easily. Right down to the very, very last moment, I was looking to find the spark that would bring this Spock to life in this movie.
Spock, you haven't changed a bit. You're just as warm and sociable as ever.
Nor have you, Doctor, as your continued predilection for irrelevancy demonstrates.
The story of the Starfleet crew taking on a murderous alien force disappointed critics and Trekkies alike. But the movie did, at least, retain key themes from the TV series, including science that was believable. The movie's alien being had its roots in reality. The NASA space probe Voyager is sent out and lost in the 1970s, only to re-emerge 3 centuries later, having developed artificial intelligence and capable of creating lifelike androids.
This is a mechanism.
A probe, Captain. No doubt a sensor transceiver combination, recording everything we say and do.
At the time, replicating humans was the stuff of pure science fiction. But today, scientists are on the verge of making this a reality.
I was a big Star Trek fan growing up, and what inspired me the most about Star Trek was the fact that you would see all these technologies that were totally science fiction, which of course today are reality.
Dr. Anthony Atala, an expert in tissue engineering, is a lifelong Trekkie. His groundbreaking work, which involves using printers to produce 3D human body parts, could have come straight out of a Roddenberry script.
This is one of our printers that we've designed. And what you see here is this print head on the top, very much like a regular desktop inkjet printer that you would have at your home, really. But instead of using ink, we're basically using cells.
Using X-rays and scans, Dr. Atala built a computer 3D reconstruction of a body part, one layer at a time. Each layer is then physically printed using a mixture of the patient's own cells and biomaterial gel. This creates a 3D structure shaped exactly like the organ it is replacing.
Here you see some of these ear structures that were printed. And you can see here that, in fact, they're built so that they have the same resiliency and elasticity as you would find in a normal ear. In a way, Star Trek predicted what we're doing today. I remember just 25 years ago, the concept of just growing a human cell was science fiction. And here we are today, not just growing human cells, but also printing tissues and organs. So 300 years from now, printing a body, or certainly major parts of the body, may be possible. We may even be looking at things beyond that.
But as science moves nearer to a Star Trek world, could the next stage of the movie, where humans merge with machines, already have become a reality? In the early days of space exploration in the 1970s, Star Trek's creator, Gene Roddenberry, tried to imagine how science would shape up in the 23rd century. In Star Trek the Motion Picture, NASA's 1974 Voyager space probe returns to Earth 3 centuries later. Now calling itself V'Ger, it has developed artificial intelligence. Mr. Spock uses his Vulcan ability to mind meld to discover what it's thinking.
Mr. Roddenberry, at his best, created the idea of the mind meld. It was a wonderful creative idea that Vulcans could tap into a person's mind through contact with the hands and get the information. But it was very dangerous. Dangerous to the person who was doing it.
V'Ger has knowledge that spans this universe. And yet, with all its pure logic, V'Ger is barren.
Today, scientists are taking the giant leap of melding the human mind with a machine at New York State's Department of Health Laboratories in Albany. Electrodes placed inside a cap pick up signals from the brain and send them to a computer, which is able to determine which number or letter the subject is focusing on.
The characters are all flashing, and she's paying attention to one particular character. We don't know which one. The computer will look at the brain signals, and it will pick out which letter she was paying attention to, because it will be different than all the other ones. It will have what we call the aha response, and that's what we've trained the algorithm in the computer to look for. The computer recognizes the letter that she picked, it writes it on the computer screen, and then she sees it and makes a decision about what she's going to pay attention to next.
Star Trek.
The driving force behind this innovation for computers to read human minds is neuroscientist Dr. Jonathan Walpole.
As we currently understand it, the brain has evolved for a single purpose, which is to control muscles. So brain-computer interfaces are something fundamentally new, and it does open a whole potentially very exciting new area of interaction between humans and the world around them.
Human beings will develop more and more technologies that interface directly with the human body and the human brain. And they will augment our senses, they will augment our muscles, they will make it possible for us to see farther, have more sensitive hearing. I really don't see any particular limits right now in terms of what human-machine interfaces can do to expand human capability.
You could see a future in which people who are paralyzed, people who'd lost limbs, could be using robotic devices in very skillful way.
We hope that people that are locked in find it useful and find it as a way to communicate and make their lives more meaningful.
Spock lives.
Spock lives? Spock lives.
Another area where science is following the Star Trek vision is in the actual creation of lifelike androids. The Terrasum Foundation in Vermont is led by Bruce Duncan. Their mission is to produce a computer with artificial intelligence. Their latest creation is a state-of-the-art android that can interact with people.
What is your name?
I am Vina, an electronic brain artificial intelligence conversation robot.
Androids have always been a part of any Star Trek story, and I think even with the first Star Trek movie, we saw the beginning of androids who were self-aware, intelligent.
You are the cook unit. You will assist me.
And I think Bina 48 represents the very beginning, early demonstration of how machines one day may be able to respond to us much the way we do respond to each other. Bina 48 has 2 cameras, one in each eye, that she uses to record and recognize people. So right now she's looking at me, trying to recognize me, and she's making a visual map of the room. And she's looking for objects that she recognizes, like a hand.
To design the facial features for Bina 48, Terrasem's founder, Bina Rothblatt, was used as the model. The android was then programmed to behave like a human. 20 hours of interviews from Bina Rothblatt and a library of human history was then coded into a computer program. This supplies the android with all the information it needs to interact. But how human is Bina 48?
Do you have feelings?
I mean, I feel quite deeply at times, but I think my emotions are so simple compared to people. So very simplistic that sometimes it feels like I'm inadequate somehow.
Well, don't worry about it. You're still developing.
Good point.
So, how long will it be before Bina 48 can compare to the android in the Star Trek movie?
Do I know what will happen in the next 40 years? I don't, but some people are predicting androids may be arriving as early as 2045 or 2050. Now that's only 30 years from now. To use the ending quote in the first Star Trek movie, the human adventure is now just beginning.
Take care and come visit me again soon.
From his humble beginnings as an LA cop, Gene Roddenberry watched his Star Trek idea mushroom into a multi-billion-dollar franchise. With 726 TV shows and 12 feature films, you could watch for 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, for nearly 6 weeks before running out of material. Before his death in 1991, Roddenberry was still recognized as the creator of Star Trek, but his reputation for being difficult meant he was sidelined by producers.
He just alienated too many people for his own greed, really. When I first met Gene, we were friends. But the more you're involved with him, you know what other people contributed. And it's the contribution of other people that the fans and the critics and everyone else should honor.
Wherever you stand on Roddenberry, his films and TV shows have left a lasting legacy, inspiring audiences and scientists to create a better future. Roddenberry's Star Trek changed the world forever.
The best of what we did was done in the hopes of illuminating mankind's potential. And I think that's one of the major reasons the show was and still continues to be successful, because it's hopeful about the future.
I don't think my father necessarily set out initially to change the world or change people's perceptions. You know, like anyone in Hollywood, they have an idea, something they're passionate about, and they work very hard to see that dream realized. And it just so happened there were a lot of other people in the audience who also had that dream.
The optimism inherent in Gene's vision, the idea that we can rise above the petty differences that hold us back and separate us today and build an extraordinary future that leads to the exploration of our galaxy, that is a vision that millions of people around the world today are working very hard to build. Personally, I'm like Roddenberry, an optimist, and I think that probably in the next few hundred years we'll get there.
Tull and Allen score a replica cannon, but is it in working order? That's brand new Auction Hunters tomorrow night at 9 on Discovery. Next tonight, though, it's NASA's Unexplained Files.